Glory to God. I really hope you are learning. All our labors is towards your learning. We labor and work so that you can learn. So please ensure that you learn. Ensure that you learn and learn well. Last week we considered Niger missions. I just discovered I've not been sharing texts. I've not been reading from the Bible. And it looks kind of awkward, especially based on our culture here. So we're going to look at the text today in Acts 13 and verse 1. Read the King James and the NLT to give a biblical perspective to our discuss tonight. Now in the church that was at Antioch, there were certain prophets and teachers. Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and then Saul. Give me the NLT. Among the prophets and teachers of the church at Antioch of Syria were Barnabas and Simeon called what? Called what? Called what? Lucius from Cyrene, Manaen, the childhood companion of King Herod Antipas, and Saul. So last week we discussed Niger missions. The idea of Niger is not, of course, Niger State. Particularly we're looking at Nigeria. And the phrase Nigeria is kind of rooted in Niger, which you can see means black man. Do you understand? Are we together? And we are considering Upper Niger missions tonight. I will have titled it Sudan missions, but that may confuse you. Sudan missions, or Sudan in the context of our discourse, just refers to northern Nigeria and upwards. Remember that this concept of Nigeria, called Nigeria, is a new concept. This is just a 1919 concept. It's not more than maybe 100 years. We're discussing history, so those concepts are not too strong in history. So we're trying to use terms that are more historically, should I say, relevant. That's why we are terming it and tagging it like this. But when we say Upper Niger, what area of Nigeria are we talking about? Huh? Northern Nigeria, that's the idea. So, Niger missions was discussed Southern Nigeria. We're discussing Upper Niger missions. We're discussing missionary activity in Northern Nigeria. That's just the idea. Are we clear? So it's not a rema. It's not like up Jesus. It's just geographical descriptions. Are we good with that? Can we pray a few seconds? Lord, we ask that you give us light into our souls. Cause your word to inspire us. In Jesus' name we are prayed. So Upper Niger missions. Our previous conversations had its timeline before Nigeria's colonization by the British Empire or the British government. We've discussed how the Portuguese missionaries came in the 15th century, attempting to introduce Christianity to areas like Warri and Benin. And subsequently, we saw how Christianity began to gain grounds in the 18th century in those same areas and in other areas, particularly in southern Nigeria, through the ministry of the Bishop Ajayi Samuel Crowther. All of that happened before Nigeria's colonization, which took place somewhere around the late 18th centuries or mid 18th centuries actually. But of course, we know that the white man, as it were, was already active in this part of the world, particularly with respect to, in the earlier centuries, slave trading, and subsequently, after slave trade was abolished, they tried to do some legitimate commercial businesses. But the idea of northern and southern Nigeria existing as a unified colony was strange, was not, in the conversation that we are trying to have now. Northern and southern Nigeria, and please, we need to do lots of geographical and political history so that when you are even praying for Nigeria, you know where we are coming from. Because I think some of you believe that God created Nigeria, like he put it together. No. All right, and that's why when you are praying, you need to understand proper perspective. Of course, we are told in the book of Acts that God sets the boundaries of all men. In other words, as it were, he has divided different lands and apportioned it to men. But you need to understand how we even arrive at this point. Because if you observe closely, you will see very obviously that northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria are very distinct and unique and different. Culture, religion, perspective. You see that it's like two different territories, yet it is joined together and called Nigeria. But you need to understand how we got to that point. Are we following here? So it's important to note how the marriage between northern and southern Nigeria came about, particularly after the British colonial rule. In fact, the name Nigeria was given by Lord Lugard's girlfriend. Yeah, go and check it out. It's not something, it's not a secret too. That's why I say when you are praying for this country, please don't be praying without understanding, without even understanding how we got to this point. It's British, it's British colonial influence that gave us that name, Nigeria. But of course, you see the idea is from black man. So the idea is from Niger and black man. Are we still together? So some of you are very fair. You are not Nigerians. Me, I'm a real Nigerian. Black man. Those of you, you are pink. I was asking my son how many colors of human beings exist. He said there's brown and there's pink. I say I understand. Because what you call black is not really black. It's just dark. You can say dark skinned and light skinned. Are we still together now? So we want to do a little bit of some political history so that when we discuss the missionary history or spiritual history, you can understand how everything links up and you can have a proper perspective to some of the discourses from a very holistic point of view, not just a church point of view. Let us understand fundamentally why Britain colonized Nigeria in the first place. Why did Britain even colonize Nigeria? What did they find? We make them colonize Nigeria. There are a couple of answers. Let me give you the popular ones, and you can deduce what probably is the authentic ones out of the popular one. We'll start with the one that the British themselves always say. They claim that they colonized Nigeria because they were trying to stop slave trade. Remember that they came into an agreement sometime in the Age of Enlightenment that the slave trade was going to be abolished. We read about that last week. And so they agreed that the concept of slave trading should be replaced with legitimate trade. However, within the area of the Niger region, slave trade was still happening at the back door. And so they decided to take matters into their own and say, let's go and colonize them to stop that slave trading. It is also important to note that the idea of slave trade was different from our own idea of slave trade. For instance, they slave traded mostly, especially on the national level, to cultivate farms and all of that. Of course, there were a lot of other atrocities, even killings of the black people. And they also saw the black race as inferior. But when we wanted to do our own slave trade, it was a little bit hyper, a little bit more barbaric, as it were. And so it was like a great concern to the Western world. And they came to the conclusion, let us just go and colonize them so that we can stop this idea of slave trade. Are we still together now? So the British Empire banned slave trade in 1807. They abolished all slavery in 1833. But within the Nigerian environment, slave trade was still a major business. Even amongst towns and communities within Nigeria. It wasn't just transatlantic, that is, it wasn't slave trade across the oceans or between white men and black men. Even amongst the black people, a lot of slave trade was going on. There was also the issue of course, commerce and legitimate trade. That's another reason why Britain colonized Nigeria. They saw that Nigeria had huge commercial potential, especially by the time we entered into the 18th century. They discovered Nigeria was rich in palm oil, which was a big, luxurious agricultural produce at that time. Palm oil and palm kernel and all those stuffs. And they began to take interest in our nation, particularly to colonize what we have as agricultural substances. Again, I told you last week, they looked at Africa as a very fertile agricultural ground, and so they took interest in many of the things that we were producing as crops. In fact, one of the reasons they took our slaves was to go and plant those things or cultivate those farms in those other countries. So, many historians believe that this is the major reason why Britain colonized Nigeria, because of our palm oil market, palm kernel market, and all the products that were very useful to them and to their economy that we had at that time. Another reason is that they wanted to assess the interior of Africa. Now, if you see the map, I don't know if the PRU can help you with that. If you see the map of Africa, you know, of course, that Nigeria has borders across the water areas. And so the other areas that could not be accessed because there were no waters needed a starting point to explore. So they said, if we can colonize Nigeria, for instance, we were able to access Niger Republic, we were able to access Chad and Sudan and all those other interior parts of the, in quote, Sudan that do not have linkages to water bodies, and so we cannot use water transportation to access them, because in those days, of course, there was no flight, and there were a few train operations, but water was the major means of transportation. So their logic was, you get Nigeria, you can access. Remember, they were looking for, economic value in all these countries. Africa, you see, at that time, the European countries were just dividing Africa for themselves. You have, for instance, the French take on Cameroon, and then the British say, we must collect Nigeria. Because every Western power was trying to, improve and consolidate on their superpower status. Do we understand here? So they were looking to explore which country are we going to lay hold on, and of course do what we want to do with them. And that's another reason why they took interest in Nigeria. Another reason, which is a subtle reason, is that they were afraid of the spread of Islam. Now again, if you look at the map in Africa, before all this Nigerian distribution and descriptions, you see that in the northern part of Nigeria, a lot of work had been done by Islam to have a stronghold in those parts of the Sudan. And so they were worried that if Islam keeps progressing, they were going to be in trouble. One of the reasons was because of the way Islam ruled. There was a lot of, should I say, heavy taxation. So if you have to pass an Islamic route, and you are, for instance, a British or French, representative, you have to pay huge tax. And so they didn't want that. They wanted to do business in a way that they will be in control. Are we together here? So they were afraid Islam is spreading. Islam was coming from North Africa and was spreading down to, as it were, southern Nigeria. It had already enveloped a lot of northern Nigeria. So they said, okay, let us go and conquer southern Nigeria. All right, and then from there spread our tentacles. And of course, they did a very smart job, because after conquering southern Nigeria, they began to extend their influence towards northern Nigeria. Glory to Jesus. Okay, that gives you an idea of why the British colonized Nigeria. Now, a more important and relevant question for us as believers is why the missionaries supported the colonization of Nigeria. Because one of the things that people have said about Christianity being a white man religion is that the missionaries were like the spiritual arm of the colonizers. They brought a Bible and hid a sword inside. They claimed they were teaching us the Bible, but they were actually trying to capture us. That's the narrative the woke atheists may sound like or may express about the idea of the church's involvement with colonization. So you need to ask, why did missionaries who were supposed to know better, and by know better I mean if we are establishing truths like justice and equality of man and all of that, although as we see the study, you will now understand why some of the missionaries felt that colonization was a great idea even for the gospel. So let's quickly answer that question. Why did the missionaries support colonialism? Now the first is that many missionaries had this idea of a definition of colonial rule or colonialism. The definition was that it was a liberation project. Colonialism was not a capturing project, it was a liberation project. Now you get into a colony or a culture that is under the spell of darkness and Satan, and then you liberate the people there to learn a better way of life. That was how some missionaries defined the term. That's just talking about the definition of the term colonialism. But there were some reservations, of course, that the missionaries had about colonialism. But when they considered what they thought was the holistic perspective, they came to a conclusion that it was for the greater good. Now, this mindset was based and founded on how they perceived Africa. Let me read somebody who was a very pivotal figure at that time. His name is Compel, all right, founder of the Sudan Inland Missions. He wrote that there is a land in this wonderful world called the land of darkness. You already know the land, Abi? Do you know the land? Dark are their bodies. All right, dark are the body. I'm quoting them. Dark are the bodies of the people who live there. Darker are their minds, and darker still are their souls. The great land of darkness. Now, statements like that abounded in many of their missionary literature when they were describing the African race: black skin, black mind, dark souls, and in need of liberation. Of course, this was particularly because of the way the black man did their own slave trade. The white men did slave trade, but the way black men did their own, it get as it be. So they concluded that this is a very dark continent that is in need of colonization. There was also the concept of what is called paternalism, and the idea is that they viewed the Western nations as parents. They were like the parents, and the African nation was like a baby that needed a father. They had to nurture them into the light. Everybody say love and light. Yeah, So that's how they viewed it. And that's why they justified the efforts of the British Empire to colonize many African nations. Let it be clear, when we say British Empire, the state and the church were very close-knit. So, it was with Bible that they, in quote, went to war. It was the sign of the cross that they conquered nations. So in one of his books, Kum entitled the chapter, The Baby Nations of the World, and he described Africa's countries as being in our own hands, as little children whose fate we may make or mar. So basically, they looked at Africa as this continent is like a toddler, a little baby, and we need to go there and take care of them. But we can't take care of them if we don't by force colonize them and bring them under our own government. Of course, the British Empire was very loud on many moral virtues like justice, and treating your neighbor right, and don't killing people, and a strong sense of work ethics. So they just felt that, listen, we the British, we are the fathers of other lands, and so we need to go and take care of this baby continent. Are we still together now? That's the dominant reason why many of the missionaries supported. They of course saw it also as an opportunity. Okay, if we get over into this continent, we can preach the gospel. But in all honesty, people expected better from them, realizing that the dominant reason for the colonial masters' incursions, as it were, was to rule over the people and to take their resources and govern them by giving them their own culture, not necessarily the culture of the Christian faith. Because by the time we see the kind of people that they put in charge of those places, like Lord Lugard, it was not necessarily a Christian. Lord Lugard, it was also like he had any Christian virtue per se, but they were the people that the British government sent to, as it were, become governors over the territories that we conquered in this part of the world. Are we still together now? How did Britain colonize and rule over Nigeria? That's another question we need to confirm. How exactly did it happen? Was it just by violence? It wasn't just by violence. And that's why many people still blame the missionaries. Because the idea is that when the missionaries came, many of the people embraced the missionary culture. Like, we like these guys. For instance, things like the abolition of the killing of twins, and things like, respecting women, things like, teaching them to abolish human sacrifices, and teaching them about hygiene and about health. The average African citizen embraced the white culture because of how great the missionaries behaved. And so sometimes even taking over some lands and territories, they didn't need to fight. They just said, well, you people understand that we are white people, we came to introduce you a better way of life, and if you people will agree, we would help you and teach you. And the kings and the obas, and just agreed. It was not always by guns, but there were many of those wars, or many of those confrontations that ended up in a very bloody way. Very, very bloody way. Particularly with some revenge missions. At the point in time, some of the towns that did not allow for the British rule killed a couple of foreigners. Those guys came back in full force and killed almost 200 people. They were making statements that we are powerful than you. We are just giving you a chance to play ball. But if you don't want to play ball, all right, we'll play rugby. All right. So there were lots of bloody activities that took place, and violent activities that took place in an attempt to colonize the country. Some kings were overthrown, kings that did not support, particularly kings that were still insisting on slave trade. There was a king, King Kosoko. Yeah, he was insisting on slave trade. They removed him and put his cousin also, because he wanted to continue the slave trade thing. The British were claiming we cannot be here and you continue slave trade. So they removed kings, put in their own people, and all of that. Are we still together here? Tribes were classified. The Ijabus were the most reliable. They know they fight. When you hear rumors like Yorubas are cowards, you need to know where it's coming from. Yeah, just because the Ijabus competed very easily, but the Igbos were the most difficult. The Igbos no gree. So it was more bloody on the Igbo side. It was also more bloody because that was, particularly the Delta area too. That was where the waters were. So they would come in their boats and their ships with their weapons and destroy those places that were proving stubborn. But eventually everybody was conquered, especially with respect to southern Nigeria. Are we still following here, please? Now, the reason why it seemed like southern Nigeria was first of all emphasized in the colonization agenda was because that's where most of the palm oil was. So in terms of natural resources, which the British were looking for, it was domiciled in mostly the southern Nigerian territories. But also, northern Nigeria seemed to have a unified government around religion. Southern Nigeria seemed to be more scattered, different empires and kingdoms. It was also like that in northern Nigeria, but they were unified by religion in northern Nigeria. So there was like a general leader based on some of the conquest of Usman Danfodio, Sultan of Sokoto. Many of those Muslim leaders had become like the leaders of the northern Nigerian territory. And so there was a central government unofficially. But in southern Nigeria, there was no official central government. So it was just a group of different tribes. So it was easy to conquer them. Do you get the logic? Also, southern Nigeria was uncharted, and what that means is that it was unmapped and not fully planned out. So, I mean, to describe how scattered that part of the Nigeria was, it was just an accumulation of several, tribes and tongues and cultures. But northern Nigeria was a little bit more planned out, and so it was more difficult to go there because there was a terrain, all right? There was a clear map. And so those people knew what they were doing. The leaders, central government, everybody knew where they were and knew how they arranged themselves. Are we still following here? Northern Nigeria had a centralized religious government which made British authorities more willing to abide by their laws. This is a very important note in understanding why even the missionaries that came alongside the British government did not gain so much entrance in northern Nigeria. But we'll discuss that subsequently in the conversation. Missionaries and British authorities in Nigeria hoped an education-focused Christianity will be able to reform the Nigerian people. So they invested a lot in education. This is also very important to note why southern Nigeria education and northern Nigeria education are two different things. They invested a lot in southern Nigerian education. Schools focused on Christian education and Christian values. Values like monogamy, marrying of one wife. They were instilled in schools. One God. And the Bible as the ultimate authority. All of these things were taught in school. Now, it's important to also note that after a while, the southern Nigerians were significantly more literate than the northern Nigerians, of course. But the impact of this was that the jobs available by the British government were only, as it were, assessed by southern Nigerians. This is one of the reasons why northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria is in a battle. Because there was a sense of jealousy. Most of the people that were employable by the British Empire were from southern Nigeria. And then subsequently, the British Empire themselves began to get scared of southern Nigerians. Why? Because they had been educated in the British education. They knew stuff. So they were wiser, smarter, more intelligent, more daring, more ambitious. It is for this reason also that subsequently, the British government now began to invest more in northern Nigeria. Because southern Nigeria, Igberaga was becoming too much. They don't sabi book for there. So they began to do more favors towards northern Nigeria. It is true today that there are many international organizations who are based in northern Nigeria. Many aids, fund release goes to northern Nigeria. It's traced to the fact that the British recognize that, oh, we made a mistake. Oh, these southerners are becoming too powerful because they are smarter. We put a lot of investments in their education. And the northerners don't have as much education, but we also need to hold them firm. Do you get the logic now? So, all of those details, I don't want to bore you with them. Let's get into mission history itself. Now, let's start from 1888. As early as 1888, most of the missionaries were more focused on southern Nigeria. Let me read the words of, or let me just quote the Bishop Ajayi Crowther. He said he was not going to deceive himself trying to win the Muslims. That his goal was to gain the protection of the emirs in order to labor amongst the pagans. So by pagans, we refer to people that practice traditional worship. Are we following here? I beg you, hear me? We heard about Samuel Ajayi last week, and he did a massive job. But you will soon see why he could not extend too much to the northern Nigerian regions. One of which was that by the time he observed how well and formidable Islam was in northern Nigeria, he said there was no need. There was no need. That he will focus on the traditional worshippers. But he needed the protection of the emirs. What I did not mention the other time, even though I said in passing, was that by the time Britain wanted to have a handle on northern Nigeria, what they used was what is called indirect rule. In southern Nigeria, they used direct rule. They governed the people directly, as it were. In northern Nigeria, they allowed their emirs rule them. Okay, I'll get back to that. I think I will explain it in a more detailed sense. But basically, even the missionaries needed the clearance from the emirs to access northern traditional worshippers. Because the emirs, even though it was under British colony, were still the leaders of the people. The British people gave them that hand that you rule on our behalf. We will oversee, but you continue what you are doing. Continue your religion, continue your practice, and all of that. This is also an important information because many people think that the British government forced Christianity in every zone. You may even say that about southern Nigeria, but in northern Nigeria there were exceptions. But it was an exception. And it was to protect their political interests. They saw that their government was more central, and that if they tried to do everything by forcing their way through everything, there may be too much violence. They, of course, also heard that many of the Islamic leaders are taught concepts like jihad, and so they were ready to die. So they said, okay, we'll rule you, but you also rule. Give us your emirs and your judges. We'll be telling you what to do to develop you economically and politically. But religion, culture, stay with it. Are we still together now? So I was talking about 1888, Ajayi Crowther saying he wanted to focus on the traditionalists, but he needed the protection of the emirs in order to labor amongst the traditionalists. There was a survey done in Lokoja, and the survey showed that out of the 500 people that were there, or 500 people taken, or that the survey affected, as it were, or that the survey, that participated in the survey, 40 of them were Christians. So we had a town, 500 people, Muslims, 40 of them Christians. Just to give you an idea of, that was Lokoja, and that's where it seemed like Ajayi Crowther stopped progressing beyond that point. But from there, they began to form little or small Christian communities into the north. There were 2 ordained and 1 lay missionary with a school of between 30 and 40 children. This school was the first Western type school in northern Nigeria. We're talking about Lokoja. You need to understand that even as far back as that time, Lokoja was still seen as northern Nigeria. Now we have statements like Middle Belt. But, well, historically, we had northern and southern Nigeria. About a decade later, the number of Christians in the area had increased tremendously. So just by the schools that Bishop Ajayi Crowther set up and the little education that was going on, it's promoted the values of the Christian faith in that community. Are we still together now? In 1889, it was decided that the European missionaries would form what is called the Sudan Party. It was a missionary alliance, Sudan Party, under Wilmot Brook at Lokoja, and they will be in charge of the northern part of the Niger mission. The southern part of the mission will be under Ajayi Crowther at Onitsha. The decision was reached as a result of the allegations of moral laxity and incompetence that was thrown against or leveled against Bishop Crowther and his co-workers. We read about that last week. They accused him of being too soft. So they said, leave northern Nigeria for us. You face southern Nigeria, leave northern Nigeria for us. So they set up this missionary, as it were, alliance called the Sudan Party. The Sudan Party took over the evangelization of the northern Nigeria from Crowther, and they were made up of many young missionaries. Everybody say young. So they took over, take over generation. Now listen, at this point, let me just give notes of warning to young people who believe that if they take over, they'll do it better. It may not be true. In Nigeria, we say things like, we need youth as politicians. I was telling my wife just today, I think, that I cannot, the way things are going, the
current crop of young ministers will be worse than our fathers. Huh? Our fathers didn't have social media exposure. Many of their sins were hidden. We flaunt our sin. We showcase our foolishness. I don't see it getting better. We will be worse than our fathers. But we think we need more youth in ministry. Okay, youth, you better learn work. Youth. We need more youth in politics. The youngest governor in Nigeria at the last tenure, governor of my state, Kogi State, a white thief. They call him white lion. Goodness me. Mediocrity at its peak. Excellent mediocrity. Youngest governor. The idea that when you are young, you know better, you do better. Now lie, yo. If you don't learn work, you will be worse than your fathers. And that's exactly what happened here. So this Sudan party made up of young missionaries. They abandoned Ajayi's Crowder evangelization policy. What was Crowder's policy? Crowder's policy said, listen, let's not directly deal with the Muslims. We know what we'll do. Let's focus on the pagans. Build schools there and establish Christian culture. In a couple of decades, we will have a great percentage, and then we can now confront the Muslims directly. But they felt, nah, that's not necessary. That was too slow. Crowder was also a very wise man. He understood that the emirs were not just religious leaders. The British had made them also geographical or political leaders. So he was very tactful in his relationship with them. You know, he wasn't accusing them of anything. He would just ask for permission. I want to go and preach here. Can we go? They would say, go now. The northern emirs loved Ajayi Crowder. They were okay with him. But when this Sudan party, young zealots came, they adopted the policy of what is called cultural surrender. What is cultural surrender? They were going to start dressing like the northerners, eating like the northerners, having northern names. So we had many Aishas. Missionary Aisha, her real name is, give me a white name. Behida. Oh, Belinda. All right. So Belinda changed her name to Aisha. It was cultural surrender for the, of course, sake of the gospel. They thought that approach was going to be faster. So they dressed like Muslims, ate Hausa food, they learned Hausa, they spoke Hausa, and they imitated Hausa mannerisms. They thought that this policy would speed up conversion of Muslims to Christianity. The policy, however, ended up a failure. And no single convert was won. Not one. Youth. Calm down. The people that you think are slow, they may know what they are doing. You know? These people that you think they don't have passion, they don't have zeal. You better calm down and learn and ask questions. Of course, I pity the general body of Christ at large, because Crowder should just have been allowed to continue. But because they accuse him of being too soft and all of that, they just said, focus on southern Nigeria, we will take over northern Nigeria. Not one soul was saved. Why? The people, the northern Nigeria, they saw the policy as very childish. Because they know you are white, and they ask you, what's your name? You say, my name is Aisha. And like, what is that? Come on, what's wrong with you? So they considered the policy very, very childish. Now, of course, there are biblical sentiments around such conversations. Like when you go to the Jews, you behave like the Jew, as it were, or Paul saying that I became orphans to all men. Yes, however, that's why eventually in evangelizing, you must trust on the wisdom of the Spirit. Because what worked for the Jews will not work among Gentiles, basically. Of course, that's a general principle that is scripture. It's scripture, true. But then, the idea that it's just common sense, it may not always work like that. So we must pray. You see, missions is not just thinking about some human wisdom, saying if we do like this, it will work. We must pray, trust God for supernatural guidance and direction. It may not always be as direct as we think it is. Are we still together here? So the mission was counterproductive. The Sudan party fell off. Many of the missionaries resigned. Many of them died. And that was the end of the Sudan party. But in a more negative light, the Muslims saw that failed mission as a proof of the superiority of Islam over other religions. This was now a source or a means to tighten the stronghold again in the minds of the people that no faith like Islam. Because look at the white people said when they came, they were trying to be like us, you see, because our way is higher. That's how the average northerner began to think. That for the missionaries to dress like us, they must feel that our way was higher than theirs. So we don't need to learn their ways. It completely backfired. And the ripple effect was even beyond that generation. Now, let us progress into the period of 1904. And this one, we now had the period of an official colonial rule where Lord Lugard was indirectly ruling Nigeria through, particularly northern Nigeria, through the emirs and the religious leaders there. The emirs would rule over the people and collect taxes approved by the High Commissioner. They would hold law courts according to their religion and culture, and the British government will not interfere. It's why in northern Nigeria, Sharia law is still a big deal. You may say, oh, we have our own constitution in Nigeria. Listen, Nigeria is a new concept. I watched the former president of Nigeria, General Muhammad Buhari, say, I have cousins in Niger Republic. So, of course, I don't know when Buhari was born, but I'm sure that he was not born around 1960. 1960 is how many years? 60. How many, the independence we did, how many years? 65. So Buhari was, how old was he when he died? Buhari was, I think he was in his 80s now when he died. So he was born before the so-called Nigerian project. So as far as it's concerned, the guy in Niger Republic is still his brother, more than the guy in Enugu. Yeah, that's the truth. That's why I say, we young people need to really understand history, so that when you hear some old politicians talk, you understand where they're talking from. You are the one saying, why is Buhari building train in Niger? He should go and build in Calabar or where? Niger is his real hometown. That's where it belongs. He feels that. See, before this British government came and put us together, my real village was around Niger. People don't know what goes on in the mind of those old leaders. But I was saying that the law courts subscribe to constitutions that way, as it were, traditional, instead of British rules and British laws and British constitutions. It was indirect rule. The government did not interfere with the Islamic religion. Although Lord Lugard was said to have high respect and trust for Christianity and Christian missionaries above Islam, so he regarded Christianity over Islam, he rigidly refused to impose Christianity on the Muslims. But beyond just imposing it or refusing to impose, he somehow stopped missionaries from entering into those northern Nigerian territories. It was said to have maintained that missionaries would only be allowed to enter Muslim areas at the invitation of the ruler of the area. So if the emir calls you, you can go and preach there. If the emir does not call you, don't go there. The person who took over him, because after a while, somebody was governor, Percy Giraud. He took over in 1907. He was more emphatic about the indirect rule. He scrapped the educational program of the CMS. Yeah, last week I made a mistake. I called CMS Catholic Mission Society. Actually, it is Church Mission Society. Church Mission Society, please. So I apologize about that. Are we clear? Yes, so this Giroud, or Giroud, whatever, he planned a new one based on Islam. Because you must understand that Christianity spread through education. A lot of the Christian spreading in southern Nigeria, it was schools. Because one of the things Jair Crowder focused on with the next generation, just say, don't forget their fathers and their grandfathers. In the next 10 years, this little boy will be a man. So let's focus on him. And so when they came to learn, they introduced Christian education for them. And that was the idea. CMS planted some schools too in northern Nigeria, but this guy came and scrapped everything and he replaced it with Islamic educational curriculum. Although missionaries were allowed in Sabongiri, the place Sabongiri is strangers' quarter, they were not allowed to enter core Muslim areas. The policy also continued with Sir Iskret Bells, who took over from Sir Percy. And it continued even until Lord Lugard came back for a second term to serve as governor over the district. Are we still together now? Are we still together, please? I'm sorry the conversation is a lot and it's a bit draggy, but please just learn the lessons, pick the highlights, and run with it. The persecution of Christians by emirs and residents began fully after 1906. For example, Christians were removed to distant places to work for the Public Works Department, and emirs declared that Christians would be denied inheritance and possession of land. I served NYC in Kebbi, and I understand this is a very wonderful tool of subjugation, where you deny another religion land. I saw that I was, in quote, the leader of the NCCF, and the NCCF bought land. The only place they could buy land was on rock. They won't sell land to you. So all the churches were domiciled in a rocky environment. So there are some churches, this is the way the building is. Yeah, because by the time you start laying foundation, you can't drill. My church, that time, I will climb almost a hill, like you will do exercise. And that's the only place churches could go. In Yauri, in Kebbi State. Anybody that wants to build church, they put them in a very bad area. But the mosques were in great sites in the city suburb. Deliberate attempt to subjugate the other religion. So any Christian that said, or that publicly declared to be Christian, they would tell them that they cannot inherit any land. The site that was given to Christians in the village of Gimi following Lugard's intervention in the second tenure was a place notorious for tragedy. That same site, the Christian village of Gimi, the population rose to about 161. They were wiped away completely by sleeping sickness. Of course, they deliberately gave them that land so they would go and die there. So these things began to happen. The persecution was not just by sword. And these persecutions were protected by, the British Empire supported it as it were. Because they were trying to protect their own political interests. That we don't want any issue with the emir, so let's allow them to do the way they want to do, although they'll be paying tax to us. Are you following here? You can begin to understand why now it looks like Christian projects failed across northern Nigeria. This with the, issues happening on the net. Okay, even in pagan areas, that is in areas that were not officially Muslims, many administrative officers became hostile to missionaries. For instance, in Kabwe, a successor to the throne became a Christian. Somebody who was supposed to be the next emir became a Christian. The British government removed him. Why? Why did they remove him? He refused to perform pagan rituals that were contrary to his faith. So you see that the British were, in a way, pro-Islam, in a way. And that's why you cannot just say the colonizers and the Christians are the same thing. Nah. Are we getting it here now? Okay. Now let's discuss one event that showed how colonial activity affected Christianity in Kano and Sokoto. Just one event, but it's a little bit interesting, so I'll run through a few narratives. But let me start with the fact that what we call Central Sudan was one of the greatest unreached mission fields in the world. It consisted mainly of 7 important Hausa kingdoms that together formed the empire. All right, so there were 7 kingdoms that formed the empire under the Sultan of Sokoto. Each of these 7 kingdoms had its emir, and they were independent in a sense, but they were still sending tributes and taxes So the main king, the Sultan of Sokoto, or the king of Sokoto, are we following now? One of the tributes they sent was slaves. In those, of course, one of the reasons Britain colonized Nigeria also was to modernize commerce. Means of exchange, cowrie, clothes, agricultural produce, and slaves. So one of the ways they sent taxes was by donating slaves. To keep up with the supply, the emirs every year carried out raids. They went to go and raid pagan towns. Although Sokoto was Sultan's capital, Kano was the larger and more important city. Kano is a very ancient city in the history of the Nigerian conversation. Very ancient. And one of the most civilized, based on the standards at that time. Kano was described as the Manchester of Central Africa. From the fact that it was a great manufacturing center. All right, anybody been to Kano before here? All right. Kano. No wonder such a land attracted the attention of Christian people, and many coveted it for Jesus Christ. So private individuals began to make plans on sending missionaries to Kano. There were many failed projects in this direction because it was so difficult to get to Kano. Remember, there were no waterways connecting the cities. So if you had to travel, let's say you want to go from Canada to Kano, it's a suicidal attempt. 4 youthful members of a mission band went around trying to use the Niger route, but neither of them made it alive. A band of 3 young men from Canada who did not understand the implication of their task also attempted the Lagos-Niger route. One died, one was invalidated home, that is, sickness basically sent him back home. The third continued with neither provisions or money, but he was fleeced, eventually robbed, and ultimately found dying in the village of Gieku. That was very close, actually. He was almost arrived. And I'll also show you in details how people move and how people moved eventually from the water areas into those places. But it was a very difficult thing to do. Subsequently, 3 young men were taken to Tripoli. Tripoli is in Libya, to go and learn the culture of Islam and the language of the Hausas, with the agenda or with the hope that they will be sent as missionaries to the northern Nigerian territory. On January 22nd, 1900, their mission started from Lagos. It consisted of Bishop Tugwell and the 3 men who were trained at Tripoli. The plan was to travel through the Yoruba forests. Of course, even road network was not, I'm talking about 1900, was not, so it's such a risk. So what they did was that they had to carry bags and loads, of course, through horses. So they would employ local, what's called carriers. These carriers will lead them. Say, okay, where are you going? Say, we are going to the other side of the Sudan. Okay? So those ones, the local people knew the road, so they will employ them to carry their bags, and then they will follow them. 1900, January 22nd, they began the expedition, traveling through the Yoruba forest to the Niger. In the first part of the journey, they passed the established mission stations. So we already had mission stations that people like Ajayi Kada had set up in Ibadan, Oyo, and then in through Ilorin till they got to Niger. Crossing the river at Jebba, they entered the Sudan. By the Sudan, I mean the northern Nigerian regions. Are we still together now? The party advanced slowly, riding on horses because of the slow carriers. The carriers were a mess. They were a lot of trouble because sometimes they will be going and they'll just say, we are tired, we want to rest. And the missionaries don't know the road, so they have to wait for them. Sometimes those ones will just leave, go and kiss their wife and come back. And those ones were just stranded. So it was a very slow journey. Sometimes they will change their mind and say, the money you are giving us is too small. We want more money. And they knew that these people were stranded. Imagine coming from Lagos. Now you are in Kotongora. And the person that is carrying your load say, If you don't give us more money, I'm going to leave you here. So sometimes they will actually leave. This was what we're going to look for. Trying to employ another set of carriers. So it was a very bumpy journey, as it were. Now, as the missionaries were traveling, people were hearing rumors. This is important because around that time, there was already a national awareness, by national I mean across territories, that Britain was colonizing Nigeria. It was coming gradually. Everybody take notes, get ready. The British guys are coming. It's a matter of time. So when they saw these missionaries, I be they are the ones. Say we will kill them once and for all. Say we could just commot them. So there were a lot of observations, suspicions about these guys, and every time the missionaries entered into a major town, they noticed people look at them like, they've come. They were assessing them. Did they come with guns? Did they come with knives? But they always noticed that these guys were very just normal guys, no weapon, nothing. So they were perplexed at what exactly are they looking for. Of course, only the missionaries knew why they came. They came for mission work. They were trying to get into Kano and do a massive mission activity there. By the time the bishop, Chongwell, and his party were entering the Sudan, the Sultan of Sokoto and his emirs were being notified that the Queen of England had undertaken to rule over them, and a strong patrol was already being worked up at the Kaduna River to find a suitable place for the headquarters of Sir Frederick Lugard, the new High Commissioner. On April 6, the party reached the great walled city of Zaria, the first capital of an empire to be visited, or rather of an emirate. You remember there were 6 emirates, is that not so? Was it 6 I mentioned? 7. So Zaria was the first one they encountered. And the emir of Zaria was a notorious slave raider. He was a notorious slave raider. But they welcomed the missionaries and even encouraged them not to go to Kano. That Kano people will not receive them. That they are very proud in Kano. That's what everybody told them, that Kano's guys are very proud, that they will receive them. Of course, Kano was very civilized. Just like I told you, like the Manchester of Northern Africa or Central Sudan. So, but the missionaries felt that they had to go to Kano. They would have stayed and labored in Zaria. It would have probably been a better move, but they were insistent on going to Kano because of what they had heard about the city. Well, the emir of Zaria provided them with a guide and an escort, and even wrote letters so that they were able to present to anybody who challenges them on the way. The missionaries continued their journey towards Kano from Zaria. They estimated it would take them about 8 days to reach Kano from Zaria. The bishop Tugwell, had written to the emir of Kano, telling him about his intention to come. The emir of Kano sent messengers telling them not to come. Unfortunately, they missed their way because the emir of Zaria showed them an alternative route. So they missed their way. Well, whether fortunately or unfortunately. By the time they arrived at close territories around Kano, they noticed that there was hostility because the chiefs of those towns and villages did not come to welcome them. Normally, in those days, a white man comes around, the chiefs will come to welcome them. Oh, what do you guys want? So how can we make your, whatever, easy and all that? But they noticed nobody welcomed them. So they began to suspect that. But I say, well, I don't do. But what the chiefs of the towns claimed was that they were very sick and they were unable to come and visit them. Well, on April 19, 1900, they arrived at Kano. On reaching the palace, the conversation was very stern. The emir asked, "Why have you come? Are you soldiers?" They said, "No." "Are you traders?" They said, "No." "Are you explorers?" They said, "No." "Why have you come?" They said, "We are religious teachers. We are Christians. We have come to ask permission to teach your people." The emir replied very angrily, "We have enough malams." The idea of malams, of course, teacher in the northern language as it were. "We have enough malams of our own. What will they teach?" Just before the missionaries began to answer, the emir shouted, "You must go back! You must go back now! I will not allow you stay in my town. Bishop Tugwell urged the emir to have patience. I'm saying this so that you can understand the labors of missionaries. People entered, left Canada, went to Libya for training, passed through forests, arrived at the place you're supposed to walk. They say they're not going to allow you. When we say do evangelism, we say it's stressful. The spirit of Tugwell will stand up and say, I wish you came in my time. I wish you came in my time to know what stress is. Bishop Tugwell urged the emirs to have patience. We have come from a far country. We have been traveling several months, meeting with many difficulties and dangers, spending so much money. Now we have reached this great city, and you ask us to go back. What will the world say? The emir was not moved. He told them that they had 3 days to leave his city. And that if they want to preach in the city, they must go to Sokoto and obtain permission from the Sultan for the preach in the city. Well, the bishop tried to say, okay, fine. You reach the Sultan and tell them that we have come. He said, no, go yourself and obtain permission by yourself and come back if he gives you permission. They kept them in a very small mud house with temperature of 95 degrees inside. Yeah. They told them you have 3 days to do your business, and afterwards, whatever your eyes see, now you go cause them. They told all the women that they will be killed if they gave the missionaries food. And so these guys were really in a mess. Eventually, April 27th, they passed out of the gates of Kano and set their faces towards Zaria. They wanted to go back to Zaria. Unfortunately, the report had gotten to the Sultan that Zaria people entertained, so they killed the leaders. Yeah. And one leader that if you see these people, just tell them to come out. They must not enter. And of course, it was phobia because of the British guys coming. So anybody they saw, they suspected. Anybody that came from abroad, they said, yeah, maybe they're spies. Are we getting it now? This is a very interesting story. I had to share so that you understand how the rumor of colonial rule also affected the entrance of some of the missionaries. Eventually, they had to settle down in that same town, Geku, and everybody died there, basically. This was another failed mission. Okay, I need to round up here, so let me just say one or two things. In comparing the northern and southern parts of Nigeria, there are a few other things to note with respect to why it seemed like the southern part was more productive for the Christian missionaries. Let's first of all discuss the fact that most of the northerners were always moving. There was this issue of, because they were cattle rearers, they were not settled. So there was a lot of movement. It was not like many settled adults. And so that also, in some ways, affected, building schools, building hospitals. They did that. There are many things I had to skip. There were a lot of hospital evangelism that failed. Many of those outside guys, once they got well, they got back to Islam. Again, it reminds us that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation. And it's not charity. Charity can be tools, they can be aids, but the real power of God is the gospel. Are you following here? Another issue was that many historians believe that the British focused on southern Nigeria because of the guilty conscience that came from the slave trade. It was discovered that more than 80% of the slaves that the British guys took from Nigerian regions, more than 80% were Igbo guys. So it felt like, oh, we have wasted this guy's life. Let us go and do gospel in that place and build schools and build hospitals and help them because we really suffered this environment. Are you following here? Was there slave trade in the northern Nigeria? Yes, but it was mostly the Arabs that were trading slaves around that area, not necessarily the British. So when the British came and took over Nigeria, they said, let's focus on southern Nigeria. Now then we really suffer past. It's also noteworthy to mentioned that because, of course, that's where the waters were domiciled, it was easier for them to enter southern Nigeria. I mean, just step down from their ships and boats and then do whatever they wanted to do. Okay, there's also the fact that the northern culture did, because of Islamization, were very, of course, skeptic about inventions. That's the idea of Boko Haram. The idea is Western education is sin. That's the meaning of Boko Haram. It's a very strong philosophy in northern Nigeria. So they were anti-innovation, anti-invention. Anything that introduces us to a new life, they don't like it. All right, and because most of the missionary activity came alongside the idea of our culture, our way of life, our healthcare system, our education, the northern guys absolutely just did not embrace it. We also have the issue of ex-slaves or former slaves, because most of the slaves were from southern Nigeria. I mean British slaves. When they were released to Sierra Leone, Freetown, most of them, when they released them to go back to preach to their hometown, where did they go? Southern Nigeria. There were not too many northern Nigerian slaves. So when the bulk of missionaries were from former slaves, it was only logical that former slaves went back to southern Nigeria areas to preach. So we had more gospel laborers in southern Nigeria because there were much more slaves from that area too. Do you get that now? I think that will suffice for today. That's basically the conversation.